Campers, it's me, Ari Lehman, the first Jason Voorhees. From Friday the 13th, I'm here with AJ, and he's got the juiciest slice ready for you. It's dripping with blood. Jason never dies.
Salutations, all. Welcome back for another trip into the heart of East Texas, where a certain family was living in happy isolation until the day their idyllic little world came crashing down, when their nefarious activities bled over into the real world, and they were forced to escape to locales unknown, and remain out of sight for over a decade. I'm of course talking about the Sawyers.
We were just having fun. You think this is a party?
Please.
Everyone's favorite assemblage of cannibalistic misfits. This time, I want to answer the question, what would have happened?
Hey, you can take me to my house. I live right off this road.
Had they taken the hitchhiker up on this suggestion? And furthermore,
You could have dinner with us. You like head cheese? My brother makes it real good.
had dinner with the Chainsaw family? I don't think the answer is what you might think or expect.
No way. With a sledge. See, that was better. They died better that way.
If anything about this trip's your fancy, please like, subscribe, and share.
Yes.
Between realizing it gave serial killers a smorgasbord of ready selections, an increase in the affordability of vehicles causing an uptick in ownership, and eventual across-the-board illegalization, picking up hitchhikers fell out of fashion some years ago. But way back in 1974, when still a prevalent practice, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre maybe started the trend by offering up a nightmare pickup in the form of this odd birthmarked fellow.
This thing, with the new way people put out of jobs.
Friendly enough, his weirdness and spontaneous self-harm
What are you doing to yourself?
thoroughly put them off, so there was little chance, even had Franklin bought the photo.
Huh? $2. It's a good picture.
No, man. Franklin, give him back the damn picture.
They were going to drive him all the way home, even if it would have been very cordial of them and more boon than they might have surmised. Unfortunately, there are individuals so antisocial that even if they seem spirited and congenial, they mark themselves as deeply untrustworthy, dangerous even.
You man, put that knife up.
But then, that could have all been a matter of how they interacted with him. Hippie types, they maybe weren't very experienced dealing with innately violent and simmering people. Had they been better able to read his mannerisms, they could have de-escalated and avoided winding him up into a violent outburst. Not to say it's incumbent on anybody to moderate the behavior of others, but it can be helpful in mitigating sticky situations, since not everyone acts with the civility, decorum, and decency one might expect in a society with so many checks and balances. I for one have a lot of experience with those who could fly off the handle at the smallest provocation, so I'm confident I could navigate the social conundrums one such as the hitchhiker would present. Such people don't really need a lot of an excuse to be activated, but there are means by which you can better prosper a calm state. First off, maybe not have a knife out and immediately broach animal slaughter.
Hey man, did you go in that slaughter room or whatever they call it? The place where they shoot the cattle in the head with that big air gun thing.
The hitchhiker might have had little or no filter, but in some ways he was cleverer than he seemed, able to operate under the radar despite a whole list of shortcomings, including an appearance that did him no favors, exploiting a blind spot that folks like him, the ones others would rather avoid, are granted through nothing more than being themselves. But he wasn't self-aware enough to realize even his attempts to ingratiate were met with strange looks because his vibe, everything about him really, made him not only a walking warning against the perils of not branching the family tree, but the kind of guy others regret engaging.
I was the killer.
Damn.
Let me see him.
If he were a little less off, he might have done a better job facilitating a lengthier ride. With the energy crisis going on, making it so people were always looking for fuel, He could have incentivized giving him a ride to a place closer to his objective by mentioning his familial connection to a gas station as an enticement. Also, that would have given him, despite his personal bizarreness, some semblance of normalcy. If his family were business owners, how bad could he be? It would suggest at least some due diligence was undertaken to rein him in, as a means of protecting their reputation, because you're not likely to have a successful business if your loony kin was going around disseminating craziness like a maniacal Johnny Appleseed. He couldn't have made any promises.
I got no gas.
You can't offer what's being waited on until it arrives.
Transport won't be here until late this afternoon. Maybe not even until tomorrow morning.
But he could have made sure they were first on the list when the truck arrived. Well, high on the list at least, since he didn't exactly demand respect.
Come here, you nap-haired idiot! No! Where are you going?
Anyhow, taking the hitchhiker at least to the gas station would have been a good idea, and advantageous in more ways than one.
Alright, let's return from La La Land.
Their stop at the We Slaughter gas station and barbecue joint, as it went down in the film, was quite telling. The proprietor, who we would learn is the great
Drayton
does everything in his power to dissuade the day trippers.
Well, now look, you boys don't want to go mess around the old house?
From going to their intended destination, suggesting that they could face dangers aplenty.
You're liable to get hurt. We'll be careful.
This was actually a fair warning. Back before mobile phones, traipsing around a decaying, long-abandoned derelict house would have been particularly dangerous, if for no other reason than if the worst happened, help would be so far away.
You don't want to go fooling around other folks' property.
Seeing that wasn't enough deterrence, Drayton put himself out by giving a warning of possible violence.
Some folks don't like it, and they don't mind showing you.
Offering the most pertinent warning, one that could have prevented everything if Kirk paid attention.
Is anybody home?
Some folks don't like it, and they don't mind showing you.
Of course, Franklin had to open his fat mouth,
Oh, my father owns it.
That's your daddy's place, huh?
prompting the proprietor to shift to encouraging them to sit a spell.
Look, I got some good barbecue here. Why don't you fellas stick around here a while?
Soon enough, he'd have what they need, and in the meantime, they could enjoy some succulent food.
The transport will be by in a little while.
All this suggested he was hoping the group wouldn't wind up their victims. It would have been easy to manipulate them into a dangerous situation, but he'd rather they leave the area and not get mixed up in the mayhem that defines his life.
Look what your brother did to that dog! Yeah, he got no pride in his home!
As much as the audience has wanted over the years to attribute greater conspiracy to the Sawyers, and a later film would make such a line of thought unambiguous,
it ain't no fucking biggie. Of course, it's different for every individual.
in this initial entry, there's really no evidence of their crimes going beyond killing the occasional passersby to fill their freezer. Some point to the hitchhiker going out of his way to leave a blood smear on the van. But I don't think that to be the case. I think that was more about him having a fit and wanting to terrorize the van's occupants for as long as he could, because they rejected his totally unobjectionable overtures.
I have this knife.
Like I've pointed out in the past, if marking them were the intention, Drayton didn't care. If anything, he realized they'd had an encounter with the hitchhiker that went haywire, and wanted them far away before the oddball made his way back to the area.
Can't be helped, young lady.
At this point in his life, Drayton only relegated someone to a victim and a side of meat when there was no other choice to avoid detection. Otherwise, he was very conflicted, well aware their murderous activities were beyond wrong.
I just can't take no pleasure in killing.
What happened in the film seemed to move the needle of his morals. The upturning of one's entire life can do that, since later he's fully on board with killing for fun and profit.
Big pre-game brunch tomorrow means a ton of croissant sandwiches. I love this town.
All this leads me to how I speculate it might have gone down had the group accepted the hitchhiker's offer. Had they shown up at the gas station with him in tow, obviously Drayton would have had to do some damage control, subtly orchestrating everything to the best of his ability. Hospitality, Southern hospitality especially, dictates that if an invitation has been extended, it needs to be honored. I believe he would have sent the hitchhiker to their house ahead to make sure nothing untoward was in sight and get Leatherface sorted, perhaps while the group was distracted with going to Sally and Franklin's family house. In that case, the proximity of the two places likely would have been remarked upon, preventing Kirk and Pam from walking over there when the creek proved dustier than a mummy's cooch.
Crap. This must be it.
The group would have eventually returned to the gas station, and Drayton would have maybe closed up early. All he had to do was leave a "sorry, no gas until tomorrow" sign, so he could keep an eye on his dim-witted brothers and their company. If my theory for how they managed to get away following the events of the first film, when everything points to the farmhouse not being that difficult to locate, there could be a whole other dimension to this, but that's neither here nor there in regard to this bit of theorizing. Anyhow, I believe they would have gone to that house, had dinner, and maybe even bunked down there until they could purchase gas. The house was powered by a generator.
Gasoline.
So perhaps since they had the group to dinner, and Drayton would have surely wanted them gone as soon as possible, he would have sold them enough gas from a personal supply to get them on their way. However it went down, they would have eventually said their goodbyes and gone on living their lives.
Christ's sake. That's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard.
You might consider this supposition outlandish. Feel there's no way the family could restrain their psychopathic ways. Absurd to think they could get through 5 minutes without giving up the game, let alone a whole evening. What do I say to that? Oddballs exist. Really strange folk with all levels of maladies and various loose screws. And they operate in day-to-day life. They have jobs, pay taxes, attend church, and go about their business like everyone else. You might see them at Walmart. Would Drayton be nervous as hell?
I assume that is a rhetorical question.
You assume whatever you goddamn well please, it ain't no skin off my ass.
Would they find dinner a strange concoction of unidentifiable mystery meat that tasted good, but left them with questions in their heart of hearts, explored only in darkest night for years to come? I'm not claiming the whole thing wouldn't have been a profoundly weird experience. Breaking bread with
Whole family of Draculas.
would be something else, but it would be survivable. I tend to think it would have been the sort of night that either cemented the group's bonds for life or forced them to go their separate ways. The thing is, country people often aren't bumpkins, nor are they stingy. In fact, many are almost ridiculously generous with folksy courteousness, food, wit, and jocularity. Would this be beyond the Sawyers? I don't think so. They might not have been the most presentable or social family.
Hey, lick my plate, you dog dick!
It's not a condemnation, but a statement of fact. You, as the wonkiest family member of all, should understand.
Dog will hunt.
The fear of the outsiders who live far from the city that this film makes the most of is actually based on little truth. Although in modern times we've seen some incidents that make me strongly reconsider ever approaching a stranger's house even for help, since it would seem trigger-happy cowards are out there just looking for an excuse. But I digress.
Man, look at him go, like a millionaire on a cocktail wiener.
Remote rural backwoods places might seem entirely desolate, but unless you're literally miles out of the way, others are around. Even if they went out of their way to limit it, here and there, the Sawyers had no other choice than to interact with regular people. so would have methods in place to cope with such intrusion.
I don't like the tone of your voice.
And this might sound weird, but even psychopaths, your serial killers, hitmen, what have you, have their own morals, values, and decorum. Sometimes that means being polite to those who, under different circumstances, could be on the chopping block. But the family's actions aside, wouldn't the group have been confronted by a lot of suspicious behavior and even objects?
Just some things you gotta do.
There's such a thing as blissful ignorance. The hitchhiker made a compelling argument his family were nerds for meat.
They use the jowls, the muscles, and the eyes, and the ligaments, and everything.
With a thumb, if not a whole fist, up the butt of the industry.
My brother worked there. My grandfather, too. My family's always been in me.
And that explained enough about their aesthetic that anything they saw beyond actual human remains would be explainable. And if they did happen to see a stray femur, short of a straight-up skull, and even that could be a medical specimen, they would have probably bent over backwards not to see a problem. Denial is more powerful than any natural phenomena, because it can erode reason almost instantaneously. It's way too easy to contrive excuses to maintain the status quo and illusion of normalcy, for the simple fact we humans, most of us anyway, really don't want to recognize something we then have to in some way deal with, when it's a whole lot easier to look the other way. A lot of what was around the farmhouse, from the generator to the assemblage of junked cars under camouflage netting, wasn't actually all that strange either. All over rural America you can find such sights. Isolation might breed craziness, but it also breeds the ingenuity of making do. Wouldn't the smell of decomposition tinge the air in a way that couldn't be ignored? Maybe, but when...
There's roadkill all over Texas.
Got that right.
It goes with the territory. The film did open with a dead armadillo.
A 16-story building under construction in downtown Atlanta collapsed today, killing at least 29 persons.
Setting the stage for prevalence of rot. How could curtained-off rooms with dead parts in them go undetected? If no one went exploring, no one got too nosy, it's common respect to not poke around without permission in someone else's home. And had they made the Bluebeard folly and gone looking around where they weren't welcome, well, that would have been a whole other horror movie, wouldn't it? Did I just crack the code for a good remake or reboot or reimagining? The same sort of characters and situation, played out entirely differently? We can only speculate.
Ooh, it's like being stabbed in the ears.
What might the group have made of Leatherface, decked out in his pretty lady mask? They probably would have thought it really strange, and oh, would they have gossiped about it later. But they would have been polite in the moment, and maybe considered the family progressive for accepting a transvestite, in an era such acceptance was much less common. Maybe they would have assumed he was merely a mentally disabled man-child, playing a personal game of dress-up. Since they were the kind of open-minded types who likely wouldn't have judged negatively either way, it's possible Sally and Pam would have helped him with his makeup. It would definitely seem he could use the help of a woman's touch. He clearly has only the most rudimentary sense of how to apply makeup. Wondering just where the hell the leather he used to make the mask came from anyway. Come to think of it, not showing the mask transition is another of those unseen details that lend to the film's off-kilter nature. Seemingly no matter what, even as invited guests, strangeness would have abounded. But so what? Oftentimes we're forced to overlook oddity. No matter what, bringing the hitchhiker home would have very likely saved all of their lives.
What?
Maybe underlying messaging that doing a good deed might be worth it even if the recipient is a gross, scary weirdo without a shred of social grace.
Oh, I thought you was in a hurry.
even without engaging in a cannibal dinner date. Had he been with them when they reached the gas station, they would have been made aware there was no gasoline to be gained at the farmhouse, and none of them would have wandered into the den of death.
Those things is dangerous.
Well, I've about reached the end of the rope, so I won't leave you dangling. Thanks for enduring my musings. Please share any refutations, opinions, accusations, japes, or other ideas in the comments below. And please join me for whatever I'm up to next time. Bye now!
Bye, creepy man! Keep it creepy!
He's a weird guy.
Goodbye!
That's the last goddamn hitchhiker I ever...
That's the juiciest slice. Yeah, not.